Good morning, it's Charmaine Hammond here, and we are here on our third webinar for NIOSH Week, which is the North American Occupational Health and Safety Week. I just love the importance of this week because workplace safety is critical. I want to welcome you all. We've got a chat box on the right-hand side of the screen. You should be seeing that now. You're welcome to type in your comments and questions as well. One of the things I've really enjoyed on these webinars is people sharing what they're doing in their workplace, best practices, policies, programs, strategies that you've implemented in the workplace that have worked really well for you. So please make sure you share on the chat box. Again, ask any questions. I'll be looking over there. If you see my eyes going over there, that's what I'm doing, checking in on the chat box questions. Let us know where you're listening from today. Where in the world are you? I am in Edmonton, Alberta today, where the weather is, actually, I'm looking outside the window, it's lovely and sunny, although we're praying for rain. We are really, really praying for rain. Many of you that are watching today are from Alberta. Some of you have friends and family in Fort McMurray or colleagues or coworkers. And I just want to take a moment as we start off today's webinar to recognize all of the incredible emergency responders, safety professionals, leaders, and community members that are working so hard, so diligently, and so courageously to save Fort McMurray from the forest fires and to keep people safe and to keep pets safe. There has been huge pet rescues as well as rescuing people. The work that they do is so incredible, and I really want to take note of the importance of safety. We're seeing it firsthand right now in Fort McMurray and everything that's rippling out across the province. So thank you, thank you. Gratitude just isn't enough for the emergency responders and the professionals working to keep Fort McMurray safe. I also want to take a moment to acknowledge all of the individuals that have been affected by the fires. There's no words. I just can't imagine what that is like. What I do know is that Canada, even the States, is rallying around Alberta. We're seeing hashtags on social media, Alberta Strong, Together We Are Strong. And that's what our province and country is made of, people who care and people who support one another. And people who are making such a difference through kindness. So thank you, thank you. And many of you watching are wondering, what else can I do to support Fort McMurray? One of the things that we can do is share resources, accurate information. This is one of the things I wanted to talk about today. One of the beautiful aspects of promoting safety and communicating in this day and age is that we have social media. We can get information out there quickly. However, there's a caveat to that. There's a lot of information that's floating around that is not accurate. It's rumor-based, fear-based. That happens in emergencies. That happens in workplace crises and workplace safety issues. It happens. So one of the things we have to make certain is that the information we're sharing is accurate. I always, always, always recommend, if you are looking for accurate information, we get that from emergency response services. So our RCMP, our city police, are an important part of getting accurate and up-to-date information. We can do that through social media, through calling the offices. But the other way that we can get accurate information, especially as it relates to safety, in addition to emergency responders, is also through the municipalities. For example, in Fort McMurray, I want to give a really big shout out to the regional municipality of Fort McMurray. I lived in Fort McMurray for 16 years. It was my home. It still feels like home. It has a very special place in my heart. And I did a lot of work with the regional municipality of Fort McMurray over the years, and they're working really hard to share up-to-date critical information. And by sharing information, folks, what we do is we reduce fear. Many of you who have been in my workshops and seminars have heard me quote Dr. Shawn Duperrin, and she says, when knowledge goes up, fear goes down. When knowledge goes up, fear goes down. Dr. Shawn talks about the importance of having knowledge and information, because the more informed we are, the more our fear goes down. So I just wanted to mention that. Welcome again today. I see we've got some folks from Edmonton. Welcome, Sarah. Good to have you on today. Sarah's with the RCMP. We've just been talking about the importance of our emergency responders. Anyone else on can also let us know where you're listening from. Now, in terms of who I am and what I do and why the topic of resilience and safety planning is so important to me, my background was first in correctional work. I was jail guard, a correctional officer in Ontario, Canada, where I lived. And boy, oh boy, did I learn a lot about safety. Some lessons I didn't want to learn the way that I learned, but I learned a lot about safety, and I also learned a lot about resilience. I'm going to use the word resilience a lot in today's webinar. And when I use the term resilience, what I'm talking about is the ability to bounce forward after change, challenge, crisis, and adversity. The typical definition, if you look up resilience, you're probably going to find a definition that says the ability to bounce back after change or crisis. It's the ability to adapt. I think that resilience is actually more than that. I think resilience is more than bouncing back. I think to be resilient, we have to learn something from our experiences and be able to incorporate that into our actions, our attitudes, our belief systems, and how we show up as humans. So if we just bounce back, we're not really going to do that. That's why I created the term bounce forward. I like it. I think it describes a lot of what we do when we cope with tough situations. I've done a lot of work with emergency responders. So I've spoken at a lot of safety conferences. I've done a lot of training with RCMP, fire departments, safety professionals, and leaders. And one of the things I hear them talk about all the time is the importance of resilience. They deal with tough situations. We deal with tough situations in our work. And what's important is that we're able to deal with the situation, learn from it, cope with it, and then move forward. We can't get stuck. One of the things that I've been noticing as I've been watching and supporting so many things that are going on right now as it relates to Fort McMurray's forest fires is the togetherness that I'm seeing, the rallying, the supporting of one another. And that is so critical in safety. Now, if we take that to a workplace situation, it's the same. Workplaces go through crises, safety incidents, workers getting injured, and we need people to rally around together. That's how problems get solved. That's how people heal. Now, in terms of what I did after I left the correctional system, I was in this system for about 10 years as a correctional officer, found my passion actually working with young offenders, and that was my first leadership job, running a young offender facilities, and boy, oh boy, that was a lot of learning. I was new at learning about how to implement policies of safety and implement practices of safety. We had policies, but I can honestly say I don't know that our daily actions all the time actually promoted safety as much as they could. So when I left the correctional system, I went back to school, got a master's degree in conflict analysis and management, became a corporate mediator, and I also mediated hundreds of separation and divorce and family conflicts. And in conflict, and in conflict resolution, one of the pillars, the foundations to keep the process strong, healthy, and respectful is really focusing on the safety of people in the room. Now, we're talking about safety from two perspectives in conflict resolution. We're talking about safety from the perspective of their physical safety, making sure that the environment people in conflict are going to be in will be safe. It's confidential, it's private. But we're also talking about emotional safety. So the physical safety, the setup of the room, and also the emotional safety, that people won't be harmed by the conversations that they're going to have. So I mediated hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of conflicts that were pretty entrenched, pretty difficult, with a very, very high success outcome. I also started teaching people about conflict resolution and resilience. And I was being called on more and more in the workplace to actually teach people these skills and to help them set up conflict resolution processes and even internal conflict resolution processes where there was a trusted colleague, a trusted ally, where people could go and talk about a conflict without having to go through some of the more formal channels, such as filing a grievance or taking things to a more serious level. And I opened my own business in Fort McMurray. So that's where my dispute resolution company opened, and we grew fast from one person in the first year, me, to 2 offices, 10 staff, and a lot of different programs and services. And again, because of the nature of the work that we were doing, safety was critically important. Now, since 1997, when I opened my dispute resolution company, I've rebranded. My company has changed quite a bit. I'm now located in Vancouver and California. I know I head out to California for the Alberta winters and for the Canadian winters. And I get the opportunity to speak as a corporate trainer and speaker around the world. And safety is always part of what I teach. It's critical in everything we do. So let's rock and roll. We've got lots to cover today. Again, any questions that you've got coming up, any comments that you'd like to share, put them in the chat box. I see Jennifer's here from Red Deer. Welcome, Jennifer. Great to have you. Now let's rock and roll. When we talk about building your safety and resilience plan for 2016, 2017, you know, this can go 2018, 2019, 2020, but you do want to make sure that any plans you do are updated regularly. I see this so often in the workplace. I see it with policies all the time. People create a great policy, and sometimes, or sometimes not, they create great processes and steps to implement the policy. And 10 years later, we're working with a policy that's outdated, doesn't work, drives people crazy, and it can actually create safety problems. It is so important to review all of our policies, not just safety, because what we dictate in our policies around how people handle certain things will impact our safety. Let me give you an example of that. Many years ago, when the working alone safety, working alone safety guidelines came out by the Alberta government, we were ahead of that actually in our company. Because Hammond International had been providing mediation services and training for so long, we were seeing incidences of safety that were jeopardizing safety because people were working alone. So we actually, long before the guidelines came out from the province, we were starting to train people on how to work alone safely. And we were also training people on workplace violence prevention. Now, a lot of people, when they think about workplace violence prevention, what's the first thing that comes up? Physical aggression, loud verbal abuse type behavior. When we think about workplace violence, the definition legally is so much broader. It certainly does include acts of physical aggression and violence, and acts of verbal aggression and violence. But the definition of workplace violence also includes things like sabotage, people sabotaging another's safety. I'll give you an example. I was doing a mediation years ago in a corporation, and there was an interpersonal conflict between 2 employees. So they were not getting along. There was rumors going on and lots of inappropriate conversations between these 2. So they were recommended by HR to come in and work through the conflicts with me. And now what I learned as I started to do the pre-mediations, which is basically where a mediator or a mentor or coach gets together with the people in conflict before they go into the facilitated meeting with both or all parties that are involved. So as I'm doing the pre-mediations and having the conversation with both parties separately, I'm starting to get the feeling that there was some sabotage type behavior going on between the 2 of them. They were clearly setting each other up. It became apparent that they were actually putting one another's physical safety in jeopardy. That was a whole other process that got handled outside of the mediation. However, what I learned that day from doing the mediations is that when people are angry at one another, when people are feeling that their needs are not being met in the workplace, or people are feeling they're not being valued, acknowledged, or respected, and when people are in conflict, sometimes the behaviors they demonstrate, the ways in which they show up are very, very destructive. So this is why we talk about this. Now, in terms of safety, as a speaker and a trainer, I've been doing this for a long time. I've presented to thousands of people around the world, and that's my passion right now, is speaking. And also, of course, I'm an author. I love writing. When we talk about resilience and safety planning, there's a few things that we want to know about the plan. And I call it the 4 Ps. So you can write this down. I'll certainly type up some notes and send those to you afterwards. The 4 Ps of resilience and safety planning. Number 1 is that we have to take into account the people. We have to be really realistic and practical when we develop policies and processes, that we actually consider the people and how the people do their work. Here's an example. A municipal organization that I worked with years ago, they had done a lot of work on their safety program, and really, really exceptional work. One of the challenges they had, though, is that when they were writing the policies, they weren't in touch with the people that had to implement the policies. So the people writing the policies were really far removed from the day-to-day work of the employees. And so the policies caused frustration, but the policies also created an unrealistic expectation. What the policy said was not actually how things worked in reality. And it was partly just because the policy writers were so far removed from the day-to-day operations that they were writing a policy that was really good and solid, but the employees couldn't implement it because it's not how things actually worked. And so this municipal organization, what they did next time around with their policy reviews is they brought together a review team. I thought this was great. They brought together a review team that was comprised of municipal workers across the board from their organization and from their county and from all different areas. So from fire rescue, emergency services, their safety professionals, from FCSS, Family and Community Support Services, from planning, from legislative services. So all the different departments had a person on the committee, and then they looked at, does this policy fit? Does this process or expectation fit for how you actually do your job? Great conversations, great learning. So we have to make sure that the policy is written in a way that the people can implement, that people understand it, that people are trained on the policy. People are important when creating any kind of a plan, a policy, or a process. So number 1 is people. Number 2 is then having processes. One of the challenges that I see with policies and procedures around safety is that sometimes there's a really solid policy. It's very well described, but the process, the how do you implement it, is lacking. Sometimes it's lacking detail. Sometimes it's lacking not just clarity, but specifics, where there's a lot of room for misinterpretation, assumption, or for people to make up what they think it really means. And of course, anytime we have that happen, that impacts safety, doesn't it? So we really want to be careful about that. So people is the first part of the planning process. Second part is the processes, and also the systems that you actually have to include to make any kind of a plan work. The third P is that we have to problem solve it. Now, in safety, you've probably all experienced this in your organization, that a safety infraction happens, or a near miss, as we call it, and there's an investigation, there's a process to be able to look into it. And that is critically important for any kind of plan, is that we have to problem solve any of the issues. We have to actually look at the plan after we write it. I do a lot of work with corporations, with all 3 levels of government, nonprofit organizations. And one of the things I hear them say all the time is, oh, I don't even remember what that policy said. So if we are that disconnected from our policies, it means that we're probably not showing up in a way that we are supporting our policies, procedures, and plans. So we have to really, really promote it, and we have to problem solve it. Promote it is the 4th P. We have to promote our plans. We have to make sure people know about them. We have to make sure that people know if our plans change. A great example is a strategic plan. All of you have been through the strategic planning process. Some of you are kind of going, strategic planning. For many of you, it's not a positive experience. I love strategic plans. I love goals. I love processes and systems. And because they give people something to hang on to. They give something for people to hang on to, and that's so, so important. When we don't have plans and systems, people flounder around. And again, when people are not clear, when people flounder around, that can impact safety. So with the whole concept of safety planning, we have to look at them, we have to review them. I worked with one mid-size nonprofit organization a number of years ago. And they had a great system. I'd like to share what they did because I thought that this was genius. Every staff meeting, they had a 10-minute conversation about safety and resilience. It didn't used to be resilience. They added that after I came in and did some resilience training. But they had a 10-minute block for many years for safety. So they gave a safety tip every single staff meeting. They met every Friday. That's a lot of staff meetings. And they had a safety tip. And they would rotate the safety tips. Initially, they used to have their safety committee, which was basically one person, provide a safety tip. But they found that it was not engaging the team. It was just sort of a monologue. It was sharing information from one person. And they thought what might be better is to engage the team in the conversation of safety and resilience. And every week, a different person on the team, organization, would bring up a safety tip. This is where the learning really began for them. The tip sharing was where they started to identify near misses and hazards and problems that had not been considered. Actually, maybe that's not true. People had vented in frustration about things that were driving them crazy and not working, but they weren't getting problem solved. Remember, that's number 3 in the planning process, problem solving it. So they shared safety tips. It also put a responsibility on people to be thinking about safety every day and to be thinking about resilience every day. So I loved what they did. They then expanded the conversation where every week at staff meeting, in addition to that tip that they would share, a safety learning, they might share, they would also take a couple of minutes to review a different policy. In all my years of facilitating and training, I've never seen that done. I'm not kidding you. I've never seen organizations consistently, this is consistently, review policies and procedures as part of their staff meeting. I've seen them do it when there's new policies and procedures that come in. I've seen it happen when there's a problem with a policy or a procedure, or when we're training people, but I've never seen it be part of a standing agenda item. I loved it. The staff in that organization were so well versed on policy and procedure. And I'll tell you, if there was going to be a safety infraction at any organization, that's the one I'd like to be at, because I felt so confident that this team would just step into action and people would be safe, and that they'd recover and be resilient after. So look for ways to build that, the people, the process, the problem solving, all of those elements of the plan into staff meetings. Now, when we talk about planning, let me just get my notes here, because there was another piece I wanted to let you know. We have to train people. So I know a lot of you have very active training programs related to safety. That is critical and essential. It's required. However, one of the things that happens is that we don't always do the informal training. Now, let's think about fire drills. We all grew up doing fire drills from kindergarten, even daycare, even preschool. In fact, my dad was a volunteer fireman in Burlington, Ontario, where I grew up. We grew up in our family doing fire drills. I knew where the fire ladders were as a young child. If there was a fire, I knew how to escape out of our home. So we learn, if we think about the power of fire drills and how we teach children that in school, everybody remembers stop, drop, and roll. We've all heard that as kids. Part of why we remember that is that repetitive learning. We hear it, we hear it, we hear it. But the other thing is that in school, we practice. Now, many of you practice drills all the time, not just fire safety, other types of drills, other types of emergency response drills. Practicing is critical. When I worked in Fort McMurray, I was on the 9th floor. One of my offices was on the 9th floor of the provincial building. It's a long walk down for fire drill time. It's a long walk up in high heels and with people carrying briefcases and things. And one of the things that happened one particular day, there was a problem with the fire drill. And it went off, it went off, it went off. And at one point, people did not leave. They figured that, it's just not working again. We have to practice the drills of all different types. One organization I worked with, it was a shelter organization. So they had a doorbell system that when delivery people or visitors or even other community organizations would come to the door, they had to do the doorbell and actually say who they were. And then the staff would verify that there's an appointment or that this person should be granted access into the facility because it was a a family violence facility. So very careful about who was let in. And one of the things that I thought was so interesting is that how we become complacent. So I remember them telling a story that one of the clients rang the doorbell. So they didn't ask for identification because the person had lived there before. They'd seen the person. They opened the door. But as they opened the door, they didn't realize that this person's drunk and angry spouse was with them. See, we do that a lot in life, is that we make assumptions because something is familiar to us. And so this was critical learning. Nothing happened. They stepped into action immediately. The RCMP were called. It was all dealt with quickly and safely. But there was a very powerful learning for that particular organization, and they shared this with me later. They learned that in safety and resilience, we can't make assumptions. A policy is there to protect people, and we want to make sure that we don't start making exceptions for the policy. They made an exception that day for the policy, and one time, it's only ever happened one time that I know of with that organization. But had the outcome have been different, people's safety could really have been jeopardized, not only the staff, but the safety of the clients that were in there. So we have to make sure that we teach people to practice policy. So after that particular incident, they did a lot of role plays where somebody would go outside and the staff would ring the doorbell, and they'd have to go through the process. The more we practice, the more it just becomes part of who we are and how we do things. It's like Dr. Sean DeParent says, knowledge goes up, fear goes down. When knowledge goes up, we handle things appropriately and safely. Now, one of the other things that we want to give people training on, though, is not just the safety policies and practices and processes. We have to teach people things like conflict resolution, how to have a courageous dialogue, how to give feedback, how to get out of gossip when somebody comes and gossips to you, how to share difficult news, how to say no without feeling guilty, how to make decisions and stick by them. We have to teach people those skills. One of the other skills we need to teach people is how to go from being part of a team to leading the team. Now, I'd love to hear if any of you on the webinar today have been through that transition where you were a team member and now you are leading that team. I don't know about you, but I personally think this is the most difficult leadership transition. We usually don't prepare and train people for that. There's an assumption that happens in the workplace that because that person has worked for the organization for a long time and they've worked with the team, the assumption that is typically made is, oh, they're going to ace this. They already know the team, they've worked in that particular department, they've got it covered. Now, what's not being planned for is the relationship transitions. The relationship has now changed. People have gone from being friends and colleagues to being a supervisor and someone being supervised. So we have to train people on those kind of adjustments that we make in the workplace. We have to train people on how to manage crisis, how to manage stress. If any of your staff deal with the media, this is critical. Oh my gosh. I have two very dear friends that are media experts, Dr. Sean DeParent and Teresa Cruz. And I have learned so much from both of them about communicating in crisis. Whether it's communicating to your staff, communicating within the organization to other departments, or communicating externally, the media, funders, sponsors. How we communicate in crisis is really, really critical. It can lead to so many other problems. We have to teach people how to do that, how to balance the content and their fear and even the drama that's going around the situation. We have to train people, provide information about resilience. Not everyone comes to the workplace as resilient individuals or really skilled at managing their stress. Some people really, when the pace picks up, when crisis happens, when there's been a safety challenge, when the team is experiencing a low time as a team from a perspective of resilience, it can send people off into stress leaves and into formal complaints, into performance issues. So we want to provide soft skill training, communication, conflict resolution, stress management, change management, problem solving, all of those skills, as well as the technical skills and training around how we implement policies and procedures. Now, another piece that's critical, and I promised on the first and second webinar to talk to you about team charters. I love team charters. I've been facilitating team charter development for many, many years. And a team charter, for those of you who don't know what it is an agreement that's developed with the team, not for the team, with the team. So that means the leader participates. Often the union steward and HR will be part of the process with the team. But a team charter is a guide around how the team will work together. So as you're probably assuming right now, and you're correct on this assumption, safety is part of that, how we work together. So it isn't just a regurgitation of policy. We have our policies, and we're going to refer to our policies when we develop a team charter. A team charter is more about how we work together, how we live and breathe our corporate mission, vision, and values, how we live and breathe our policies, how we live and breathe what we say we stand for as a team, as a group of people working together on a common mission and purpose. Now, a team charter usually addresses things like how the team will work together, how they'll manage conflict, how they will provide feedback, especially of a sensitive or difficult nature, how the team will manage their stress together, how the team will be resilient, how decisions get made in the team. What levels of engagement do team members have in decisions? Obviously, there's some decisions that are made from leadership or even higher up in the organization. And then there's some decisions where the team may have influence or participation in. We talk about how the team will handle emotions. Now, some of you might think, what? We get that specific? But we do. How we handle emotions in the workplace, because they're with us all the time. We can't just check them out at the door. It's not something that we can just put in a suitcase and leave outside the door for 8 hours while we're at work. Our emotions are part of who we are. And the emotions that we have, especially in times of stress, can really take our behavior on a different route. And so when we teach people how to manage their emotions. So for example, I'm going to deal with anger for a minute, because lots of you have dealt with angry people in the workplace. True? Lots of people have dealt with angry, frustrated, stressed out people. And not everybody has good coping skills, as you've seen and noticed in the workplace. So you might have one person who very professionally and appropriately brings their complaint or their problem forward to the right person at the right time in the right way. They communicate with respect. They listen. Then you may have another employee who is so angry they just shut everybody out. They check out. So people around the workplace are looking at the person saying, wow, what's wrong with them? They're not even talking to me. They're not showing up for staff meetings. So we have people who handle it appropriately. We have people who avoid or check out. We have people who get really competitive and defensive and emotional and express their anger very openly, sometimes very inappropriately, sometimes in a way that actually compromises safety and the resilience of people. And one of the things I see in workplaces is that there is often a scenario where people make excuses for one another. When I taught workplace violence prevention, I still teach this course, and I've been doing this for 15 years. There was a component in that program that I teach where I talked about what often happens in workplace violence. So if you have an employee who has been a good employee and then maybe goes through some stress in the workplace, and all of a sudden they come in and they physically threaten someone's safety, or they verbally attack someone, there's probably been other incidences that have happened that were concerning that either got ignored, maybe they got addressed, maybe feedback happened, maybe there was an intervention. But often people look at situations as a one-off. They look at them independently. Now, if you have an employee who's done this 10 times, if you put those 10 incidents together, all of a sudden you have a big pattern. You have a big issue. But there's a tendency in workplaces to look at things independently. I see this with safety all the time. It is really important to look for patterns, recurring problems. So let me give you an example. I was actually teaching. Can you believe this? People thought this was, candid camera moment, because I was teaching at a hotel conference center, workplace violence prevention, a 2-day course, and it was an open enrollment. So we had mediators, we had lawyers and judges, we had retail, we had hotels, we had leadership, we had industry, government, nonprofits. The audience was a really big mix. And at the break, when people went out into the hallway, there actually was a lot of yelling going on. Now, interesting, because people had just been in a workshop and we had just watched a video about an angry worker who started yelling at the coworkers and yelling at the leader and then actually pushed the photocopier off the table and stormed out. That was a video they had just watched. I think because they just watched that video, they actually assumed, notice I'm using that word assumed, they actually assumed that what was happening at the front desk that they all walked by was a test. They thought maybe, wow, this is cool. Somebody said, wow, this is so cool, Charmaine. We just watched this video and now you've got this role play. And it was not a role play. This was an angry customer at the hotel, someone who had stayed at the hotel who had completely lost it. That was the staff's word, not mine. They were yelling. I immediately went into crisis prevention mode because I noticed the panic on the staff's face. She was standing inches away from the edge of the counter. And this man who was yelling, swearing, kicking the counter, throwing things off the counter was inches away from he was able to touch or grab her. That's a very big safety problem right there. So I actually went into intervention mode. I actually signaled someone to call the RCMP. And the statement I got back from the staff was, what's the number? Now, I know that they know the number is 911. I know that. What the reminder was is that when people go into fear mode, they forget logical information. You've all seen it in the workplace, haven't you? Where people, they know something and they just didn't figure it out. So I had to actually coach the person through it. Dial 911. It's just like when we take first aid training. Lots of you taking first aid training. We have to say, hey, you in the red shirt with the white stripes, go to a phone. Phone 911. That is the police and ambulance. Tell them to come now. We have to actually spell out exactly what we need people to do because people miss important information. Now, back to the hotel situation. So I was telling the lady, you need to back up now, and actually intervened with the gentleman. And he actually calmed down for a couple of minutes, partly because someone new had come on the scene and he could probably target some of his anger to me. I immediately stepped 4 feet back. So my conversation with him was at about a 4-foot distance. And you've all heard that the circle, your bubble of space is what you've referred to it as. Now, I know those of you that are listening from RCMP, you so know this, you teach this. But a lot of us might not know this. If we work in customer service, if we work in an office situation, we don't think about the space that we give people. There's a big tendency when someone is upset, we want to calm them down, and there's a natural response, more so with women than men. So women, you need to be really aware of it. We have a reaction where if someone is upset, we want to touch them to calm them down. Don't touch them. I just want to tell you, from working in the correctional system, I have been assaulted initially in my career a few times too many, because my reaction as a young, new person in the correctional system, trying to figure it all out, I was 20 years old, and I actually touched somebody's shoulder to say, calm down, we're going to get through this. It's going to be okay. And as soon as my hand, I didn't even touch him. I reached my hand out, and he went like this and actually hit me. It was an accident, but what I learned from that, well, it wasn't an accident that what happened, but he didn't, I don't think he meant to hit me. He meant to get my hand out of the way. I was invading his bubble of space. We all have one. It's about 3 feet. So back to the hotel, she backed up, which actually calmed the situation down, because as long as she was in the bubble of space, she was in his space. She wasn't being aggressive or confrontative, but she was in his bubble. When we're in someone's bubble, the tension and anxiety level is huge. So the person calmed down. They actually left before the police got there, but the staff did have the person's contact number. They knew where to find him, and I'm not sure what happened afterwards. The manager eventually came. I actually instructed the staff a couple of times, get the manager here now. They couldn't find him. They didn't know how to reach him. He was, in a meeting or something. So what happened was that the particular hotel was able to use this very frightening experience for the staff as a learning opportunity. They had never trained staff on how to handle an angry person. They had tons of great customer service training staff, how to be helpful, how to navigate people through problems. They had never had any crisis intervention training. And the biggest problem for both of those staff was them managing their own fear. We had one staff in the background who was actually becoming so upset with the person, they started swearing and shouting at the angry customer from way far away. Now, whenever you have an audience in a crisis situation, the tension level and safety factor goes through the roof. It becomes much more unsafe. So that's an example of training. We often train people with what I would call the obvious training, but sometimes we miss the other kind of training. And this was an example that if the hotel was to do something like that nonprofit organization that I talked about, the shelter, where they did the practice role plays, this would be a great opportunity for them to practice. Because if we just say things like be calm, don't argue back, keep your distance, you know, that's all good and well, and that's important. But in real life, when we have a crisis, we are managing fear, we're managing a feeling of not knowing how to do something. I mean, this was my training. I did this for many years, so I could kind of step into it comfortably and safely. But when I think back to my first crisis I had to deal with as a young worker, a young professional, oh my gosh, I'm sure I didn't handle it well either. So we need to practice and provide people the practice opportunities. Recognize in the workplace, people are really uncomfortable usually with role plays, and some people take them to a whole new weirdo level. They get competitive and they become the most obstinate, difficult person, and they portray things that would probably never, ever happen in a real life scenario. So if you're providing people with training opportunities, you need to have someone in your organization monitoring that people are not being harmed through a practice opportunity. I've seen it happen in role play situations. So just make sure you put guidelines around it and you help support and coach people through the training. We also want to provide training to people on other types of soft skills around how to be resilient. Now, when you're creating your safety, and you've probably gotten by now, these are all parts of what you would put into your safety and resilience plan. We also have to provide people the opportunity to do review and learns. Review, you know, a great opportunity to do this actually would be if you look at doing a team charter. Whether you facilitate it yourself, it's actually hard to facilitate a team charter in an organization because usually it's the leader who would step up to the plate to lead it. And the problem is they become separate from the team. So it looks like it's a leader-driven activity. The advantage of having someone like me come into an organization to facilitate a team charter is that the leader can then participate as a participant. But as you develop a team charter, you want to include things around how people will be trained and the kind of training and support that they'll be offered. Now, when you build that resilience and safety plan for 2016, 2017 and beyond, we want to spend a lot of time creating the plan, checking it past people, testing that the plan is actually thorough and reasonable and accurate. Then we want to put it in writing. And we want to make sure people know where to find this plan. I've been in workplaces a lot where they've got fantastic plans, but nobody knows where to find them, which means that they're probably not in touch with the plan. They're probably not in touch with the safety plan. I started talking about strategic plans earlier. I see this a lot. I think I went on a different topic and I want to come back to that. With strategic plans, it's an example where a lot of times people don't know where to find the plan, or it's not ever looked at or reviewed or updated. And so I see a lot of clients now where they make that a standing agenda item. I love that, standing agenda item on their business meetings and team meetings. So with a strategic plan, it has to be reviewed, and make sure that you don't have multiple versions of your plan, of your safety and resilience plan floating around. I've gone to meetings to facilitate charter processes or to provide training, and people will come in with their binders that has the safety plan or the policy and procedures or the strategic plan or the business plan. And what happens is there's 3 or 4 different versions around. And so we have people operating on different expectations. So just make sure that you have the same version floating around. And you can find many ways to review and update the plan. One of them is through the review and learn process. And those of you that have been in a workshop or a seminar with me before, or a webinar, you've probably heard me talk about a review and learn process. It's 4 critical questions that you ask. Let's just say you've created and implemented a resilience and safety plan for your organization. What we want to do now is do a review and learn of the implementation process. And the review and learn with the 4 questions starts off with what went well. So you're asking things like, we've just implemented our safety and resilience plan. What went well about the implementation? What went well about how we engaged employees and team members to participate in the creation of this plan? What went well about our communicating? Were we communicating effectively and through cascading messages? Cascading messages are where we say the same information in relatively similar ways through multiple platforms. So we say it verbally, we sum it up in a staff meeting, we might do a follow-up email, we show a copy of the policy and procedure. People are getting the same information or same pieces of information through different platforms. So review and learn. Question 1, what worked well? Question 2 is, what was a challenge? This is an important question, and this is where you sometimes get a little bit of pushback. People often want to start the review and learn with what went wrong, who dropped the ball, what went off the tracks. Start them off with what went well. It's really important because it sets the tone for the rest of the meeting. Those of you that were at the IPM event with me in Edmonton and/or Calgary, remember Eddie Lemoyne talked about mindset and how our mindset drives what we attract or bring into our workplace, good and not good, positive and negative. So if we always start a meeting with what went wrong, who dropped the ball, what's going to happen through the whole rest of the meeting based on how we are as humans, we're just going to look for problems with everything. Whereas if we start the meeting with what went well, what were some of the wins, what were some of the successes, and have people go around the table and talk about what went well, what happens is we start our meeting for success. And it probably changes the tone and what people share in the meeting. Then we talk about what went wrong, what was a problem, what got in the way, what did we bump up against, what didn't land well for people. So what went well, what was a challenge? Don't get into problem solving the challenges here. There's a tendency for people to hear a problem and then want to problem solve it. Simply track the problems. There's going to be an opportunity for you to later problem solve and work the issues, but just track them right now and make sure that someone is charting and writing down everything, not selective pieces of information. Absolutely everything from a review and learn gets tracked. It's valuable information. What went well? What was a challenge? Number 3 is, what will we do differently? So next time we implement a new plan, next time we have a new policy, next time we communicate our resilience and safety plan, what will we do differently? This, in essence, is solving some of the problems that were raised in question 2, but we're working them differently. We're probably not getting into all the minute details. We're just talking at a higher level about what will we do differently. So you'll hear things from people like, we'll communicate earlier, we'll practice, we'll use more forms of communication. We rolled out a plan and half the team was on holidays. They missed the memo, so to speak. So outline all the things that you'll do differently. Question number 4 on a review and learn process is, what did we learn? This is so important, and I encourage you to ask the question in several ways. What did we learn about implementing our safety and resilience plan? What did we learn about building this plan? What did we learn about the state of safety and resilience in our organization? What did we learn about how people perceive safety in our organization? What did we learn about the policies and processes? What did we learn about each other? This is an important one. What did we learn about our team? What did we learn about ourselves, just as professionals, as human beings? So all of this goes into your review and learn process. What went well? What was a challenge? What will we do differently? And what did we learn? 4 questions. Chart them. And the next time you do a plan, maybe it's your safety and resilience plan, Make sure you pull the review and learn so that you can use that information to help guide the next plan, to guide the next implementation. So we've talked about a lot today. We've talked about the 4 Ps. So when we talk about the 4 Ps, it's making sure that your plan is about the people, that we consider processes and policies and procedures, that we problem solve any issues so that we anticipate ahead of time any issues and we problem solve them so that what goes into the plan is something that will actually work and serve people well. And then the 4th P is that we promote it. We make sure that we're information sharing this plan. We talked about things to include in a safety and resilience plan, such as training, access to support, reference to policies and procedures. Maybe the plan includes a team charter process. The plan also should include reviews, how we're going to communicate the plan. And then we also talked about doing a review and learn process and using that information to guide other plans and other implementations that you use in the workplace. So when I think about safety, I have a saying that I say all the time. I say safety, it's everyone's business. And it's true. How we show up as humans in the workplace has to encompass attitudes about safety and resilience. When we think about resilience in the workplace, we want to make sure that we are providing opportunities to help people stay resilient. So we connect them to resources. For example, great resources for any of you listening and watching is that communities typically have a crisis line. It's really important for us as team members to know our community resources so that we could perhaps share those with a colleague or somebody that's in distress. So crisis lines in Alberta, I love what we have. We have a service called 211. You dial the numbers 211 on your phone and you get put through to a live operator who can help connect people to resources. So for example, if you have an employee that's just moved to the community, they've just moved from another province, state, or country. They don't know where to register their kids for soccer. They don't know where to go and get their property taxes set up. They don't know where to go for sports for themselves. They don't know where to go for hobbies. They might not know where they can go to a newcomers kind of club to meet other people. And 211 is a resource that actually connects people to community resources. It's really important for those of you that are in a leadership position, an HR or a safety professional position, to know your community resources, because often what you're doing is you are also connecting employees to external resources. Not every organization has an EFAP program, Employee Family Assistance Program. So not every organization is blessed to have a solid benefits package for their staff or an EFAP program to refer them to. So we need to know community resources. One of the things I love is, I'm going to talk about an organization that I love in Fort McMurray. Some Other Solutions, Society for Crisis Prevention. Every year they put out a poster called We Can Help. And it divides all of the community resources by topic. So resources that deal with food and shelter, resources that deal with employment services, resources that deal with recreation, emergency response. And the poster has all of the community resources on one poster. And we see those posters get distributed to workplaces, social profit organizations, schools, even the media. Some of the media has the posters, and they use those references or the resources in part of the information that they share out in articles. So just find the way that works for you in your community to have a listing of community resources that people can access. That's really important. You also want to know in your community if you have access to CISD. CISD, those of you in emergency response, you know what this is already, but CISD is Critical Incident Stress Debriefing. When there has been a safety situation in workplaces, now usually government and big employers, and certainly emergency responders, this is not new for them. They have a CISD program. They know who to call if there's been a safety or a crisis issue, and they want to have all of the staff debriefed. But a lot of smaller organizations and social profits aren't necessarily familiar with CISD or even who to call in the community. So that's another service that you want to make sure that you know about. And I would suggest you actually make sure that that's somehow addressed in your policies and procedures and in your safety plan. Here's a great example. One of the communities that I did a lot of work with up in Fort McMurray, every year they actually had somebody from their CISD committee in the community come in and do a 15-minute presentation about, they didn't do a CISD. They talked about what critical incident stress debriefing was, some signs to look for if an employee might be experiencing extreme stress or might be at risk. And so there's other information that you can bring into your training program and into your resilience program. I love it when organizations bring in community resources as part of their staff meetings for 10 minutes to talk about something that their employees might be facing. So an example, when I've done this with workplaces, when I've facilitated the whole process of creating their plan, I facilitate and lead those processes. We'll often have several organizations come in so that we can kind of do a mock-up. People will experience what this would be like. So I've had one example was I actually had RCMP come in and they did a self-defense demonstration so that if any employee were ever walking down the street and they felt their safety was at risk, what should they do? How do they call for help? What do they do if somebody tried to grab their purse or their keys? So it's about a 15 or 20-minute presentation. That was such powerful information. Do you know I heard that organization talk about that staff meeting for years? They found the information helpful. It was related to safety, but it was something they could use in their personal life. Then at the same meeting, we also had someone come in from FCSS, Family and Community Support Services, and they talked about how to resolve conflicts with your kids or in your family. Now, a lot of people are thinking, well, why would I bring in that kind of topic into the workplace? Here's why this group did it. They have employees that are dealing with personal stress all the time. Personal stress impacts our performance at work and impacts our safety. And so they connected the employees with helpful information that would improve safety in the workplace and connect them with community resources and provide information that can help them personally. Over the years, this organization who continued to do this had a very, very well staff. The other neat thing that I thought was just a beautiful ripple effect is they had an increase in staff volunteering and participating in community resources. They had a staff that was highly connected to their community, and I thought that was a beautiful outcome, not an intended one, but a great outcome. So as we wrap up today, we've covered a lot of information. Please stay in touch with me. You've got my email. I'm hoping that you'll stay in touch through our newsletter list. I offer all kinds of free webinars and free resources to help you build a safe, respectful, resilient workplace. And again, remember, safety, it's everyone's business. I'm Charmaine Hammond, and thank you so much for joining us, everybody. Thank you. Let's be safe.